Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have James Hamet with us today. James is into AI medical devices, precisely Alzheimer's and Parkinson's therapeutic monitoring and functional brain mapping, which is a fascinating topic. He's founder and CEO at Vistim Labs. He's also co-founder and chairman at MetRock Ventures. Was founder and chairman at Lit Conversations and previously Neurable, so a bunch of companies, serial entrepreneur. I'm really interested to talk to James today. The podcast is presented to you by podpire.com. If you want to start your own podcast, you can go to podpire.com. We have a free ebook and a masterclass teaching you how to fully automate your AI podcast. James, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. My focus is on helping people live longer, healthier, happier lives. And so all of the companies I've started have been in that direction and have done that. And specifically, my area of focus right now is to better diagnose disease. A lot of people know about Alzheimer's. A lot of people know about Parkinson's. What some people might not realize until it's too late is that we have very poor monitoring techniques. So if you are to receive a therapy, for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, there's actually no way right now to see how well the therapy is working. So sometimes people ask me, well, are there cures for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? My answer is yes, I believe that there are. However, it's only possible to know for sure that what you're receiving is going to treat your condition if you can see that, yes, it is in fact working. 30 years ago, cardiology was in the same exact position where every patient was getting essentially the same therapy, and it was working for some people and not working for others. But then we had cardiac mapping. And so that's why brain mapping, which is what I'm doing now, is so important because we can allow for precision medicine of the brain. And as we know historically, precision medicine is the most effective form of medicine.
And what were you doing before you started your companies? How did you get into the founder game?
Well, I started my first company, quotation marks, when I was around 10 years old because I started making video games. And I would sell my video games at school to some of my friends. It wasn't really a big business, it was like a dollar here, a dollar there. Um, but that was also the first time that I was building artificial intelligence. A game is only fun to play if you can have kind of a computer player to play against. So I started building these things and I realized I have this ability to see something and then make it come true. And I mean, that ability I think is shared by most people, if not all people. Um, but seeing that in myself was so motivating. It made me realize that anything I can dream of, I can make come true. And having that sort of philosophy at such a young age really pushed me. And so I kept trying to start a business ever since I was 10, a business that was a true business. After building video games, then I started a Facebook clone, which I actually knew was not a good idea because Facebook was already a thing. But I wanted to get my feet wet, right? And so then I started, small business after small business. I mean, you can hardly call these businesses, right? I wasn't making more than maybe $1,000 total over the lifetime of the business. But in college, I studied electrical engineering. I made some very valuable and meaningful connections with some of my peers, and I was able to start my first venture backed company, Neurable, while I was still an undergrad student. And so I started that business in college, and that's my first big success story.
And why were you that way, like curious and entrepreneurial early? How did your parents raise you?
Well, hmm, my parents didn't really push me in this direction. They My parents are both doctors, and in a sense, they both told me not to be a doctor, which I know is a little backwards. But
It's hard to be a doctor. It's very hard,
yeah,
very stressful.
yeah, it's a tough field, and my parents really wanted to, I guess, see if I was capable of more. It's really hard to say um, what exactly. I mean, I felt that they were always supportive of me, and whenever I had these big, ambitious dreams, they would always encourage me to pursue them, even if honestly they probably didn't make sense. Um,
But science and STEM was like part of the table conversation, right?
Science and STEM was always, yeah, part of the conversation. I mean, one of the reasons that I've been working on neurotechnologies, right, is because, yeah, having two parents who are doctors kind of makes that easy. I already speak the language. I already know what I'm talking about. My dad is a interventional neuroradiologist, so I've seen more pictures of the brain than probably I should have. I'm not gonna say more than a few doctors, but I've definitely. I mean, I have done brain surgery before as well. The patient was not alive. Purely educational experience. Um, but yeah, I mean, growing up in that type of environment, it you hear the frustrations of what should be possible, what's not possible in current medicine.
Very cool. And yeah, why the brain itself? Is it because it's the hardest problem to crack, and you're always seeking that hard problem to crack and or to lives that you could impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I hope I'm not just addicted to difficult things, but it's a possibility. um, I would say that one of the reasons I'm so drawn to the brain is, my father being an interventional neuroradiologist, the brain is the main organ that he spends his life working on, reading PET scan images, MRIs, CTs, CAT scan, the whole thing. And what I'll say is that, I've also had Parkinson's in my family, and I've had Alzheimer's in my family. And I've had family members who've been paralyzed. I've had friends who've been paralyzed. Um, I started working on Neurable because I wanted to help people control wheelchairs with their mind. I wanted to create telekinesis so that if you're paralyzed, you don't have to live as if you're paralyzed. You don't have to feel like your life is reduced because you're paralyzed. It's so difficult to ask for help all the time, and not everybody can give it for you. Independence, agency is so fundamentally important to the human experience. And so I wanted to build mind controlled wheelchairs to improve agency for people. And I had kind of a wake up call about 5 years ago when I realized, I'm doing some more research on the market. And, Neurable, by the way, hasn't done very much for mind controlled wheelchairs. It was maybe our initial vision, but the company started doing some other things as well. And I was always fascinated by the original problem. But I was doing some research and I found that over half of wheelchair users are not there because of some traumatic event. They're there because they have a neurodisease that wasn't treated. It might be a progressive disease affecting them over 10 plus years of life, not being detected until it's too late type of scenario. And even when it's detected, even when we have treatments, we give the treatment to the patient and we never know when it's working. So I personally believe that we can prevent wheelchair use by over half. And that's why I'm building Vistim Labs.
Right. And with Neurable, where did the story ended for that one, and when did the Vistim Lab story started?
That's a good question. The Neurable story is not done. It continues. I left Neurable right after we created these BCI headphones. I can actually show them to you because I have a pair on my desk here. So these are headphones that have these I mean, technically it's electroencephalography fabric. And so this is conducting, and you can pick up brain waves from the cup of the earphone,
Very
the headphone.
cool.
Very cool stuff. Um, the the reason that we went down that direction of building headphones is because one of my business partners, the CEO of the company, he believed in everyday BCI.
Okay.
He sees a future where everybody in the future has these telekinetic powers. And so the strategy became, well, let's build an everyday BCI device, which is a little different from what I think our strategy should be. Where my strategy is more, let's address a niche market first. I don't like to scale without having something that's I guess a bit
It's
more.
the Elon Neuralink strategy, sort of, right?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, Neuralink is definitely a competitor. Um, but you know, we all have different opinions on things, and you know, I wasn't going to. I was a minority opinion at Neurable, and you know, that's very often the case when you have a radical idea, and I'm definitely someone with radical ideas. And so when we started pursuing that headphone direction, I thought it was cool, but I was very much still interested in the initial problem of preventing paralysis, or at least the effects of paralysis. So, you know, I did that research. I found out that, okay, there's this opportunity if there were a better diagnostic device. And I left Neurable, you know, telling Ramses and the team that, you know, I felt that the business was safe in their hands. I felt, and I still do feel, that you know my vision for Neurable is not necessarily the best one for the company. Um, it's the best one for me because of what I want to pursue, what my motives are. But so then you know, I hired someone to replace me, and I left, and I started a charity, which is Lit Conversations. And I did that charity for about 2 years during the COVID pandemic to help teenagers with anxiety, to help build better connections between students and other students, students and teachers, students and parents. And it was during that time that I came up with the idea for Vistim Labs. I connected with a professor at Columbia, and he had been doing experiments that I had envisioned and would have loved to run if I had the opportunity. And so I connected with him and I said, "Hey, you're doing all these experiments in schizophrenia, right? Not even a paralysis issue, right?" And I said, "Well, why don't we try this in Alzheimer's disease? Why don't we try this in Parkinson's? Why don't we try this in all the other diseases?" And you know, at the risk of sharing too much about the technology, um, he was showing a video to patients while they have a brain scan, while they have EEG, and he was looking to see what images on the screen does the person actually see versus hallucinate on. And I theorized that this type of approach would actually work for all diseases. Um, and we tried it in Alzheimer's disease. It blew everybody away because I was right. It worked. And now it is blowing even myself away because I'm working with some other people now, some really top neuroscientists from Purdue and some other amazing universities. And we've been able to measure amyloid protein with EEG. And the reason, I mean, the reason that makes no sense is that EEG is electricity and amyloid protein is liquid. You
Right.
know, it doesn't make sense to say that we're measuring amyloid without having some type of blood sample. And yet, our technology is able to measure amyloid with the same precision as a spinal tap.
Wow.
Explain that to me.
Why? Yeah, I
I mean,
can't.
yeah, and so we've now come up with, and our product that's hitting the market this year, we've come up with the ability to produce PET scan images using EEG. And that is our product. That's what we offer. It is not a true PET scan, right? We're not using positron emissions, but this is tomography, and we are producing the same spatial indications of amyloid. So you can get a full resolution image, but once again, it's not produced by PET; it's produced by EEG, and it's yeah, it's amazing how precise this thing is. Technically, I call them estimates, right? Because once again, it's not the real thing. But gosh, does it match really closely?
Right.
And
And
there's a reason that's so important, Charles, if you'll permit me. It's because PET scans are super expensive. You can only get
yes,
them once a year. Most people don't get them at all. My
yes.
technology, you watch a video, you wear EEG, and you get the result. And you can do this every week, every month, every time you change treatment. Instead of doing one treatment every year and then dying after 10 years, what if we had the ability to do over 10 treatments in 1 year? Try 50 treatments, 100 treatments before it's too late. Um, that's what this is about. It's about allowing the opportunity for precision therapy instead of statistical therapy. Instead of treating every patient like an Alzheimer's patient, giving them all the same drug, and then some people are happy and some people, well, we guessed wrong. I'm sorry. You know.
Right.
Thank you.
What's the okay? So the secret sauce is like some kind of algorithm. But before we get to that, what's the video that they watch? What is it about?
Well, that's the secret sauce.
Okay, yeah,
You
that's
you're right that this is an AI company, but the AI is not in the analysis, believe it or not. The analysis is the easy part.
interesting.
The core to our technology is definitely. I haven't filed all of the patents on this approach as I plan to, so that's why I'm not going to go into too much detail. Um, what I can say is that we look for differences between how the eye perceives the world and how the brain is perceiving the world. And
It's so
those
interesting.
differences, yeah, those differences are a lot more informative than I mean I initially realized or than I think anyone has realized at this point.
Okay, so let me try to double click on that. As someone that's not technical, but that's been obsessed by the brain as well since the good last 20 years of my life. Okay, so the eyes, they perceive something, but aren't the eyes the brain? Because images cannot be interpreted without the brain. So what do you mean? What the eyes see and the brain sees, aren't they the same thing?
You're asking a very good question. Yes, I mean the eyes are a part of the brain. I'm not I can't disagree with you there. They definitely are 100%. They're connected and all that. But the reason I gave that explanation is because I think that's the easiest way to summarize what this is because it's fairly complex. What I'm talking about is there is a difference between what you are consciously seeing, right? What you are mechanically seeing through your retina and what you are mechanically seeing in the visual cortex of your brain. And they have different sampling rates. So you'll see things with your eyes that you won't see with your brain, right? Again, I know it's the same thing, but the visual cortex, right? That's where it's different. And then there'll be things that you'll see with your prefrontal cortex that things you won't see with your prefrontal cortex that you have seen with your visual cortex. And so that's why I explain it that way. It's because I'm looking at that.
Right.
I'm giving imagery that is selectively targeting those regions, and I'm looking to see whether my imagery cascades to the next level or if it gets stopped.
Okay.
And so you have the magnocellular pathway, for example, that exists to connect the organ piece of the eye to the organ piece of the visual cortex, and that pathway often can get choked by amyloid. Just
Huh.
as much as it's developing in the brain, it develops in the magnocellular pathway, and then the person is not able to quote unquote see as well. And so that's one of the ways that our technology works. But there's definitely more that I would love to share after I file my next patent.
Thanks for explaining. Yeah, it's very interesting, and just how we see is fascinating, right? Like photons entering the eyes, the chemical reactions, and how the brain interprets all of that. And sometimes I guess dreams are somewhat that way, right? That the subconscious aspect, we see a lot of things in our lives, but not everything gets immediately processed by the brain. So, yeah,
Mm.
it's fascinating stuff. Then, are you hopeful that we can fix Alzheimer and dementia and Parkinson? Like, what are the most promising approaches out there nowadays?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm absolutely convinced that these are preventable diseases. I will recognize and I hope everyone appreciates that these diseases become progressively more difficult to treat over time. And so, for that reason, I think that the best scenario is for my technology to be used as an annual test. We find the disease before it's symptomatic. We treat during that asymptomatic period, right? How do you do that? Well, you need a monitoring tool, right? The person doesn't have symptoms to compare with. And so we get the person the right treatment before they have the symptoms, and then boom, no symptoms ever. That's the promise of Vistim Labs. And the truth is about, Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and these other conditions that we know they're metabolic. We know that they have some immune system factors. We know that diet, sleep, exercise, these are some of the probably single greatest influencers on the progression of the disease. So, I mean, there are centers around the world that are using diet and exercise and even music and socialization in order to treat these diseases, and they're working. It really is working. And we have therapies that have been approved since the 2000s that are able to delay the disease when taken early enough. But how early is early enough? We still live in a world where people don't get any type of treatment, whether it's exercise, diet, what have you, until they already have symptoms, right? And it's not, I get symptoms and now I'm being treated. After they get the symptoms, well, now they have to go get diagnosed, which is going to take roughly 18 months. After I get diagnosed, okay, now I need to look for therapeutic options, including exercise, right? I might not know about that. Most people don't know. But that's going to take 18 months. We're already living in a world where we're waiting way too late before attempting to treat. And still, some patients are returning to normal and getting their health back, losing their Alzheimer's condition. It's rare, but it does happen. Um, Anecdotally, obviously, but there's also some published evidence. The difficulty is that when doctors are successful at treating these patients, they're not successful at explaining the process so that it can be repeated, right? Which is basically the scientific method, right? If you are to demonstrate something to be true, then that demonstration must be repeatable. So that's the part where science is currently stuck. We can have one-off success stories, and it's very difficult to replicate. And that's why I think my technology really is the core of the problem. Will solve the core of the problem because we can help identify how to replicate. We can say, oh yeah, look, it's having an effect on this person. Oh, it's not having an effect. Maybe the dosage has to change. Maybe the specific exercise, the specific diet. Alzheimer's, for example, it could be caused by the brain becoming diabetic, maybe too much sugar, too much iron, not enough vitamin E. I mean, there really are these little tiny things that cause, I guess you could say, abrasions that the brain just can't handle with. You have to find the balance because your brain is chemical. It has to have the right balance of chemicals. Um, if you don't know that you're in an imbalanced state for years, decades, then that's how you develop these conditions. So.
Right. Last but not least, let's finish on a futuristic slash philosophical note. Do you believe in a Neuralink world in which, like, I'd be able to enhance my brain 300x and get a very unfair advantage on my competition? Do you feel these technology would be democratized fast enough? And do you feel that we could indeed merge AGI with our brain?
It's a good question. Um, I have to be honest with you that, I mean, yeah, I do think that it's coming faster than people realize. The regulatory stuff is not going to hold it back as much as people expect.
How can they, like they can't. Like if I want to install something in my brain, how will they even know that I have something in my brain? And yeah,
Well,
regulation,
the hard part is going to be to get a doctor to be willing, because they
money.
run the risk of losing their license for implanting a device in your brain in the condition that you are not suffering. Doctors are not supposed to practice augmentative medicine. It's a huge controversy, a huge debate in the medical community. You're only supposed to practice medicine when the person needs it to survive. Uh, Plastic surgery, right, is one of the exceptions to the rule, because some people argue, right, that I don't feel safe, or I don't feel like myself. I might suicidal tendencies if I don't look like I need to look. It all started with like burn victims, right? You're disfigured, and now you feel like you can't live anymore. So plastic surgery became a thing largely for that, and for our veterans as well. And then it's become more mainstream. So I would consider that to be an exception. A BCI is definitely, implanted, is definitely an augmentation more than a life-saving operation. So there will be a lot of resistance, but you will, of course, also get, the doctors who disagree with the norm and who risk their license, and who probably will operate and then lose their license. But it'll happen. And the people who have the implants, I mean, they will outperform the people who don't. I don't actually know what the implants will do. I think that the concept of downloading skills to your body and being able to like suddenly have skills, I think that's on the unrealistic end, at least for the next 50 years. I think the idea of using AI to expand your memory is a lot more realistic. I think the idea of AI to complement your subconscious, being able to have internal conversations with AI, will also become common very quickly. I don't know how often you use ChatGPT, but imagine if it's always running, always listening to what you're saying, what you're hearing, and always giving you advice. That's something that could happen. Certainly, I think that the easiest one is what we were working on at Neurable, which is okay, I have a thought that I want something to move. I want my garage door to open. Boom, it opens because I thought it, right? I think that's probably the easiest um, situation. But now I'm starting to have my own second thoughts. A BCI that's just a brain computer interface that's just listening and talking to you. I haven't thought of that before recently. I mean, with the advent of the LLMs, and I don't know if that's technically a BCI, but it's definitely easy to do, and that would already on its own provide a significant leg up over the normal human.
Yeah, I certainly talked to a founder. Forgot the name of his company. It was an optic company, and it's like a looking glass, and you have ChatGPT through it.
Mhm.
So it observes what's happening, and it listens to your voice, and yeah, basically it's open source as well. So thought that was pretty cool. I bought the Meta glasses not so long ago, and they were quite a deception because they broke for water non-waterproofness reasons. But it was pretty fun to have an AI follow me around and ask it things. So yeah, it's really promising. James, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive there. You can just look me up by name. I don't think there's anyone else with my name.
I don't think so either. James Hamet and Charles Cormier for another CEO